Hey everybody, this is T.O. from Art Geek Teaching. Thank you for joining me again today. Today is the 23rd day of the 100 Days of Art Challenge, and I have some fine art resin pieces that I've done, and I have a couple resin pieces in the next week here. Now today's resin piece I'm using, I think it's Topcoat. Normally for big stuff and countertops and floors I use stone coat, and for all my fine art stuff I would use art resin, but in this particular case, little tests and some things for practice, I used what I had on hand left over from a countertop job. So anyway, that is it. Here we go. Okay, the first thing we're going to do here is I'm just putting some newsprint down, really for no other reason than to just protect the laminate that's on the countertops there. And for this project I'm going to go ahead and use just cradle panels. I got these from Dick Blick. They were on sale, and I just bought a 5-pack. Actually, I think I bought 4 or 5 packs, but they were very inexpensive, and so I just laid those out. And because we're doing resin, actually I would do the same thing if I were using encaustic, but I'm going to tape the sides of these. It'll make cleanup a lot quicker, a lot easier. You could opt to go ahead and use whatever medium you want on the sides, and that you're putting on the top at the same time. Like we could just resin the sides at the same time that we're going to put the other resin on, or encaustic or whatever, but in this case I just wanted the sides black, and so I'm going to go through here and just tape each one of these real quickly. Don't have to be super careful. I tuck it in on the bottom so they lay flat, and that's all there is to that. So I'll just let this play for you. Alright, after they are all taped, I put a palette out and just squirted some gesso there. I like using these really inexpensive, cheapo foam brushes when I'm putting a ground on. It does a great job. They're very inexpensive, and I could get 4 or 5 uses out of those on small panels like this, but they're very fast. They leave things very thin, so I can put usually 2 nice thin coats on them, and they seem to stretch out my product a little bit with gesso. So anyway, that's all I'm using here, just putting them on, rubbing the paint in so it gets deep into the wood there. The final coat, or the final strokes of the brush, I just go through and smooth everything out, so it kind of has a, if there are any marks, they're going the same way. With the foam brush though, there really aren't very many marks, and that's kind of personal taste anyway. On these particular images I didn't really want very much in terms of texture. After the coat has dried, we go through, I just really quickly sand off, knock off the edges with a piece of sandpaper. This is actually 200. You can use whatever. I wouldn't use like 36 grit or 80 grit, but anything 150, 200, 220, something like that is going to be fine. I'm just knocking off the edges here and running my hand over to see if there's anything that I feel, again, just cleaning them up. Very, very simple, very basic. Last thing on this piece, or on this first video, is we're going to go through. In this case I'm using a baby wipe, and I'm just kind of using it for a dust cloth. You could use a very moist paper towel, anything just to go over, get some of the dust off that's left over, the residue left over from sanding, just to make sure there's no dust on the images themselves. Go ahead and put a second coat of gesso on, just like we did the first. In this case I'm using the big bottles of Liquitex. I actually really like that gesso. It works very, very well for ground especially. So same thing as we did last time. I'm going to use my foam brush, put a nice solid coat on there. These are actually fairly thin coats, but I try not to leave any brush marks by the time it's all done, and just go through and do each one of those the same way. All right, so just as before, we are going to sand it lightly, and here I'm just wiping off with a baby wipe any residual dust that might be on from sanding with 220. Next, I'm going to take my Transfer Ease solution. It's an Aid product, and you mix that, I think it is a tablespoon of the concentrate to 2 fluid ounces of 91% isopropyl alcohol. And I just put mine in a bar jar, a ball jar, and then I mix it up. You got to let it set for about 4 hours, and then once you let it set for 4 hours and it's all mixed and all put together, then you can use it. It only lasts maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 days. Some people get more time out of it, but that's typically what it lasts for me. So I'm going to coat those as you saw, and then I'm going to put on the transfer itself. And this is printed on transfer paper from Aid, and I just ran it through my little Epson printer. It's a fairly simple, straightforward process. It literally is just like making a print. And so I put it on, and then I roll it out, usually with a foam roller, sometimes with a soft nap paint roller, but roll them out, make sure there's good contact all over the place, and then let that set, usually between 2 and 3 minutes. I find that about 2.5 minutes in my environment works really, really well. You don't want to push down really hard, like you don't want to do it with your fingers, because you can spread that emulsion out, which it's fun to experiment with that, kind of like an old Polaroid transfer. But if you want a clean transfer, you just put it on there really, really lightly, and then use something to make sure it gets all the way down. I found that if I do 5 of these, it works out just about right. When I get the 3rd transfer laid down, I can go back to the first one and pull up the transfer sheet, leaving the transfer itself directly on my cradle panel. Then I go to the next one, and I just do them one at a time like that. You can see there that the emulsion kind of stuck to the transfer sheet, and sometimes that happens. If you want to get a perfect transfer, it can be very difficult. I don't mind little idiosyncrasies. It shows that it's done by hand, but trying to do, especially big pieces, it can be pretty difficult to get a perfect transfer, I find. Although, if you use fresh sheets of everything, including the transfer itself, and mix up a batch of fresh, that goes a long way towards getting something just perfect. So this is kind of what they look like at the end here. There's a little bit of stuff in the middle. I can choose to fix that with watercolor or colored pencil or whatever, or not fix it at all. Okay, the next step for me on these, I just took a little bit of watercolor, and if the transfer wasn't perfect, then I went ahead and touched them up with watercolors. Again, sometimes I can use, or you can use colored pencil, but in this case I just used watercolor and, painted in the pieces that might not have been there. Then I put them up on some cups to keep them up off of the table, and I go through and just seal everything, just to make sure that there's a barrier between this and the resin when we pour the resin. I use Krylon workable fixative. You can use just about anything for this as long as it doesn't have too much solvent in there and it pulls the paper. But any kind of seal coat or workable, it doesn't even have to be workable, just any kind of fixative will work really, really well for sealing these up. Alright, after they've been sitting, then I go through and I mix up some resin. And I've found over the years the easiest way to do this is take a little bit of the mica. If I'm using mica powders, I'll take a little bit of the mica powder color and mix that with a tiny bit of isopropyl alcohol. That then I stir up and I get as much, as many of the clumps out as I can. And I find that then when we add that to resin, you don't get the streaks that you sometimes get with resin if you don't get mica powders mixed up really well with it. So it's just a kind of a little pro tip. If you mix your mica powders first with a tiny bit of isopropyl alcohol, then it gives them a chance to dissolve a little bit better than if you just throw them directly into the resin. So I'm going to mix up all the colors here. See, the mica powders are just kind of a loose paste, maybe a little bit thicker than Elmer's glue and not quite matte medium. Okay, I've got all of my mica powders mixed, and I have mixed up some resin. The resin that I have here is it's not Stone Coat, which is what I usually use. This I think was Total Boat, and it's fine. It's a little more yellow than Stone Coat is. It's the same kind of thing. It's mixed in a 1-to-1 ratio, and so I'm just pouring a little bit into each of these small cups so that I can add some mica powders to them and get them colored. With most of the resins that I use, I mix them for 3 minutes. You do need to make sure that if you use, whatever resin you use, that you read the instructions on mixing, because mixing is critical and it does vary by product. Not all products are the same. Some of them want you to use a mixer, some of them want you to do it by hand, some of them it's only 1 minute, some of them it's longer than 3 minutes, and the mixing time really is critical in terms of getting the proper set and cure on the resins that you're using. So make sure you read the directions on those. Now that the colors are mixed, I'm going to go ahead and put a base coat of resin on each of my images. You can see there's one there that is just blank. There's no transfer on it. I'm just going to use it to play and experiment on. And for my resin, I mixed up here 4 ounces per square foot, which is plenty, I think, for an initial base coat. In fact, Stone Coat Countertop, that's kind of what they say is 4 ounces per square foot on this. And so I mixed 4 ounces per square foot, coated each one of them, and then we will spread everything around, as you'll see in a minute, add some color after we get stuff rolling. Generally, I just use my hands. I like to cover the whole thing so that it breaks the surface tension. You don't have to do it this way. You can tip your canvas or your cradle board. You can use a small squeegee. A lot of times I'll use a square notch trowel, but on smaller things like this, I just typically, even with big things, I typically like to use my hands the best. I like the tactile feel. I can kind of tell if things are stuck, if there's some surface tension somewhere. So I just use a gloved hand, go over everything, make sure it's all coated and that the resin has floated above all of my imagery, and then just go from there. Hit it with the torch real quick, pop any bubbles, and I normally do this initially after I pour, and then I'll wait a little bit. I think you can overwork this and get your resin too hot and actually stain the resin, but I just do an initial, get most of the bubbles out that I can, and then move on from there. Alright, so I'm just going to put some of the mica powder, the colored resins on there. Most of these I do ground them. In other words, I make a small little line across where and I'll do that initially just to give a start to what's going on with that. That's kind of how I normally would do these, is just using a stick here, just go across and make a little line with just one color of resin. The thing about this resin is like anything else when you're pouring resin. If you pour it right away, it moves a lot more. When it's warmer, it moves more. As it cures, it slows down. So if you want to control the movement, you wait a lot longer. On these, I kind of like things to do its own, it kind of find its own way. And so I'm pouring the colors right away. I meld the colors together right away, and then I let them move. If I didn't want to do that, if I wanted a small thin line, for example, you can do that, but you kind of have to wait until most of the resin is cured, where it's really slowing down, and then what you add to it doesn't move quite as much. It does stay a little bit closer to the surface that way. Just going through here and adding more and more ground, adding more, different various colors for the base, the dirt, whatever these creatures are standing on. Now I'll put some color in these, some of them in the sky areas, but I'm just going to mix some colors around. Alright, this is a bottle of isopropyl alcohol mixed with mica powders. What it will do is, the alcohol is a dispersant, and so when you spray it on any of the resin and it has mica in it, a colorant in it, what it will do is we'll drop that color down, and then it will spread out, and it'll kind of give you some of the same kind of effect that you can get with salt with watercolor, for example. It just spreads things out, leaves kind of a really neat textural effect on there. Hitting it again with the torch, get rid of any bubbles that might be in there. Also, in some areas, I'm just moving the resin around just a little bit. I'm not sure what was in there. I think I had a piece of dirt that went in there, so just took a paper towel and watered it up, got the debris out of there, and then added some more resin on top of it. No big deal. It's pretty forgiving until it starts to cure, and then you're fairly well stuck with what you have. Having said that, after it totally cures, you can always sand it. That bottle also has isopropyl alcohol with mica powder mixed together. It's just a smaller, finer spray, and so it just leaves finer, smaller dispersant dots, if you will. We're still working. We've got a pretty good open time, pretty good working time with this resin. Stone coat, I think you have 60 to 90 minutes. This total boat, I think I had 45, so it was a little bit faster than I was used to, but I just kept playing until it started getting tacky, and once it starts getting tacky, then of course you really need to stop because it's not going to fill in anymore. We're going to take those images that we already have a gloss finish of resin on, and we're just going to sand each one of those. I don't want a gloss finish on these. We're going to use Ultimate Topcoat matte finish, and so this is next day. This is roughly 12 hours. I'm just going to scuff each one of these really quickly using 220 on the sander, and again, no big deal, just rough them up a little bit. Now that we have everything sanded, we're going to mix our Ultimate Top Coat. This is again from Coat Countertops. I have the link in there, and this is a really great product. I use it a lot on not only countertops, but boards, and as you can see here, my fine art as well. So all I'm doing here is I'm just pouring this all out and giving it a mix. I think that's just a good pro tip there. If you have some that's been sitting around for a while, well, actually you don't know how long it's been sitting around, and so I typically just pour it all out, stir it up, and then I pour it back in the bottle and mix the amount that I want. It is a little persnickety on the mix, and so I have a PDF that has the way that I'm mixing this. It doesn't take very much of this product at all, and so part of the challenge in mixing this is it doesn't take very much for coverage, and again, all that's in the PDF. But when you're just doing fine art with it, and especially I think I have, I don't even know, 6 or 7 small 8x10s here, it does not take very much product. This is built for countertops, and so a little bit of this goes a long way specific to the fine art arena that we're using it in. I've got that mixed up, and I'm setting it aside just for a minute. What I'm going to do here is take 2 pieces of tape, and I want to just kind of defluff the rollers that I'm going to use by running them over some tape, just to get any fuzz or fur off of them. It, again, not that big of a deal. You could take some tweezers and pull it out of your mix, or pull it off the top of your image if you had a challenge with that. But I find it's much easier just to go ahead and pull it off early on before you even start, just in case there's any fluff on there. Now I'm just going to go through and pour a little bit on each one of my images. It literally just takes a little tiny bit on these images, and especially on 8x10s. I mean, these are so small for this kind of work that it's not impossible to do, but it's very difficult to do smaller amounts like this, as I've mentioned before. Okay, I have 2 different rollers. I have them marked, one for dry and one for wet. And the reason we're going to do that is because we want to make sure that at the very last we get a nice, smooth, even coating. And in the beginning, that's not all that easy to do. You can see here again, a lot of times I would move this around with a credit card or something, just to get it more even on the board before I start rolling. But this way works as well. You just gotta load the roller. Once you have the roller loaded, it's much easier. But you can see still that it's a little bit uneven there, and that's why we're gonna come back with the dry roller. We're gonna go ahead and do the wet on everything, and then we'll come back with the dry roller. When you have the edges taped like I do here, you still want to make sure that you go through and hit kind of those edges at a angle, just to make sure that they're covered down to the tape. Most often it's not a problem, but I have had them on occasion leave a little spot that didn't get it. So you know, again, best practices, go ahead and hit it with the edge, and hopefully I'll do that here with the dry roller in a second. All right, now we're picking up the dry roller, and we'll just go over it, pick up any excess amount that's on there, and you can see I'm not rolling back and forth, I'm just rolling in one direction. I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of the rest of these images, and then we'll call it good. One of the other reasons that we want to gang as much of this stuff as possible is, you know, these rollers are not reusable, and so you want to get kind of as much bang for your buck out of the material as you can, and it is much easier to mix up 12, 14, 18 ounces, something like that, a larger amount, so you can do more images. And then again, you know, the more images that you're splitting that cost from, of course, the better. All right, 12 hours later, here we go, and you can kind of see it makes a nice matte finish on these. It's a little thick in terms of, you know, your image is no longer sharp. I mean, it is a matte finish. Here what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull off all the tape. It's somewhat of a challenge. You can see there's a couple areas there that they catch right on the edge. Most of the time these come off fairly easy, but they will stick on occasion. Still much, much more simple than trying to sand everything, for sure. So I'm just going to go through and strip off all the tape. You can see here the one that wasn't taped. I'm going to have to go through and sand that, as you know, obviously the resin goes underneath and it's very uneven, not very nice looking, and so those are just kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like if you do not tape it. I prefer to tape them all the time. It's much quicker in my opinion. Okay, last piece here. What we're going to do is just mix up, or shake up rather, a little bit of inexpensive black acrylic, putting it on a little palette there, and we'll just paint the edges of these real quickly, and it just gives them a nicer finish. I typically will use a foam brush, sometimes a roller, but a lot of times a foam brush. It is fairly quick work, it's inexpensive, and it usually you only have to give it one coat, even with pretty inexpensive acrylic paint. If you use a higher quality acrylic paint, then you definitely don't have to give it 2 coats. The other thing that's really nice about this is it is resin, and so while your paint is still wet, all you have to do is go over the edge of it with a paper towel or a wet wipe, and it just comes right off. Once it's dry, it's a little bit more difficult, but it, again, it's resin, so that paint is not going to stick to it very well. That's pretty much it. I'm just going to go ahead and finish all of these, and that's the last part that I do, other than putting a hanger of some sort on them, or if I'm going to put them in a frame, then I won't probably do that. So a lot of times these just sit until I figure out what I'm going to do with them, how I'm going to present them for sales in the tent or in this gallery or whatever. So, yep, that is it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed this short little mini course.